Hello Hyperboreans! Dave here, the developer of the Hyperborea system for Foundry Virtual Tabletop, back with another video demonstrating the latest and greatest on the Hyperborea system. I haven't done a video in a little while, and so I'm actually going to be covering several releases, in fact 6 releases in total, up through today's release, which is 1.11.4. And we've got quite a few items to cover, so this video may be a little bit long. I apologize for that, but I'm going to try and keep my remarks relatively brief as we go through things. And some things I'm going to demonstrate, and some things I'm just going to breeze past because there may not be anything to demonstrate. So we'll just dive right in here, starting with release 1.8.1, which was after the last video I did, the first one after the last video I did. And we had a few issues closed on that particular release. 1 bug fix, 2 features. So the first feature was issue number 123, and it was Foundry version 13 compatibility. So I had a number of things going on there, but I finally certified the system as compatible with Foundry version 13 as of release 1.8.1. Now, at the time when I released that, I recommended that people wait on upgrading their Foundry version because, of course, it's not just the system you're upgrading, or rather the core Foundry that you're upgrading, but you have to make sure that your game systems, all of them, not just Hyperborea, and all of your modules, any modules that you have that are add-ons, they all have to be compatible with version 13 or you're going to be kind of disappointed. So I recommended that people give it a month or two at least, and then just keep an eye on things and make sure their set of plugins and modules and systems, game systems and everything are fully compatible and ready to go before you do the upgrade. But for me, and for Hyperborea specifically, I certified it as compatible with version 13 as of 1.8.1. That was the big one for that release. The next issue that was part of the release 1.8.1 was issue number 104, which was an option to enforce maximum token movement during combat. Now, this is the first feature that will only be available in version 13. So I'm not stopping support for version 12, Foundry version 12 by any stretch, but Foundry 13 added some nice new capabilities when it came to tracking token movement history, which made it easy for me to implement this feature in Foundry 13. So what this does is it in combat, it has to be in the context of combat. I'll unpause this, and I believe, yeah, I've already got a combat set up with all these tokens. So within a token's turn, you can trace its movement history and calculate the distance. So as an example, let's just look at Argyros. I believe he's got a movement of 30. Yep, 30. So he should not be able to move any further than 30 feet during his turn within the context of combat. So if I start this combat up, I'll just show you. We'll just skip ahead to get to Argyros. There we go. So there he is. And remember, his limit is 30 feet. So if I take, and I can move, try that again. What I'm trying to do here, there's a 15-footer, and then I can, if I try to, you can see it's totaling. So it says 15 by that first segment, now it says 30, so he's moved a total of 30 feet, which is within his amount. If I try to go another extra feet, see that? It cancels that last action. Argyros can only move 30 feet per round. And so now within his turn, he's stuck. Now, if you have to work around that, first of all, this is an optional feature. You just have to check the box in the settings to enable it or disable it. It is disabled by default. But if as a GM you go in and turn that on, I'll just show you that real quick here. Configure settings, Hyperborea. And we say limit movement to move speed. Disabled by default. So just check that box. That turns the feature on. Again, only works in Foundry 13. So within Argyros' turn now if I had to, as a GM or referee, if I wanted to say allow the player to move him further than that for whatever reason, all you have to do is click clear movement history. So I right-clicked him in the combat tracker. Clear movement history. You can see it cleared the movement history, and now the player can start moving him again. And it just starts the count over. So if I try to go more than 30 feet, once again, it's going to block me. But, you know, So you can override that. It's like you can have the feature enabled and still override it as the GM. Players can't do that, but GMs can. But otherwise, it's just a nice, feature basically to help people remember, oh yeah, you're only allowed to move so much. You can't just run all the way across a 100-foot field in your one turn. Now, if you don't care, if you played a little more casually, hey, leave the feature disabled. No big deal. But that's what that does. This is for Foundry version 13 only, not supported in version 12. In addition, for that same release, I had added a feature to say for an effect, an active effect with a variable built into it, like dice rolls, you could detect and resolve the die roll at the time that the effect is applied to an actor. So let me just demonstrate that because I worded it poorly, I think. But if I show you what I'm talking about, I guess I should stop my pause there. I can show you, if we bring up the aid spell right here. So if we look at this spell, what you see is that it's going to give you a +1 bonus on saving throw versus fear effects. Now, I don't have an active effect for that because it's such a specific type of saving throw. It kind of just has to be managed manually. But +1 bonus on all attack rolls and a temporary 1d8 hit point boost. And that's a variable, that 1d8, as you can tell. So what we did with the active effects for this spell is I created one called Aid, same name as the spell. And if we look at what the effect does here, the changes are, it gives you a temporary attack modifier of +1, and it rolls 1d8 temporary hit points and adds them to your temp hit points field. And so what will happen is, if we go over to combat right here, you can see I've got a temporary hit points field here. This was added in a previous release as well. This probably was 1.7.2 in fact. But we've got temporary hit points here. You've also got temporary AC and DR and a temporary move. Those were all added with the same release a while back. So when I apply the aid spell, you're going to see that get here. So I'm going to flip this over to the chat window. We're going to cast the aid spell. So let's do that. And then, of course, to apply the effect, I have to click Apply Aid. And that will apply it to any and all tokens that are currently selected, which as a GM, I can select any. If you're a player, you really can't use that. This is for GMs to apply it to anybody they want, because normally a player only has access to their own token and not any other players, let alone monsters. But depending on how your permissions are set up, that may be different. For my test setup, I have a default configuration, so as a player, I would only be able to apply to myself. As a GM, I can apply it to anybody. That's kind of an aside. Since I have Adovera selected, I'm just going to click Apply Aid. And you can see it says Applied Aid to Adovera. And you can see she now has temp hit points of +6. And if I go to the Effects tab, she now has this aid here. And I want to show you, we go in here and we go to Changes. You see there used to be 1d8 there, now it just says 6. Now if we go to the spell still has 1d8 because that's what you would want, right? We go into the effects here, it still has 1d8. So the spell itself was not changed. So if she casts the spell again later, the system will roll that 1d8 again and get presumably a different number. But when it applies, it rolls that die once. In her case, generated a 6, and she got 6 temporary hit points. So that was that feature. The other item with release 1.8.1 was a bug fix. Nothing to demonstrate here. There was an issue with certain scenes or scenes not loading in Firefox. It actually turned out to be a weird, it had nothing to do with the scenes themselves. It had to do with a previous release. I had added these two custom status effects, slowed and hasted, and they have special SVG icons for these icons here, which I had gotten from a free site, so they're free licensed. And unfortunately, Firefox didn't like those SVG files, so I had to manually edit and fix them in order to resolve that issue. I worked with the user that reported that bug, who was using Firefox, to get that resolved, and so we got that resolved. That was release 1.8.1. Okay, moving on to release 1.8.2, there was a bug fix, and it was essentially the temporary hit points that I was just showing you on Adovera. Oops, combat, temporary hit points right here. If they're applied by an effect, which they were by aid, were not tracking correctly when the actor took damage. So what happened is the damage would get applied to her and it would be subtracted from her main hit points when it should have been subtracted from the temporary hit points first. And then once those are down to 0, then it'll go to the main hit points. So that was the bug. And that was fixed in release 1.8.2, done. So that was easy. So then we move on to release 1.9.0. So we had 4 issues in that release. And remember, issue doesn't mean bug or problem. An issue is just a to-do item, right? This is a GitHub term, and it's really a software development term. So an issue could be a feature, or it could be a bug fix, or it could be documentation. It could be a number of different things, but they're tracked by, think of it as a ticket number. But issue number 128, which was I wanted to add a carry/drop toggle button to the items on the items tab. So if I start on combat, I want to show you, if you recall, this is how you equip and unequip armor. You can see even on the chat over on the right side, it says she unequipped her boots of striding and springing, and then I tap it again or click it again, and she equipped it. And then for weapons, it's a fist, but it does the same thing. There she equipped the warhammer. There she unequipped, re-equipped the warhammer. So I wanted to do the same thing for items, which I then did. It's this bag icon here. And so essentially, and it does a couple of things. So number one, sure, I can say I dropped my water/wineskin. But not only that, when I do that, it updates the weight carried, her total weight carried. So normally, I think this one has a number on it. Oh, of course, this one doesn't, so there's nothing to show there. But let me just grab, like the iron rations, 4.9 pounds, so almost 5 pounds. If I drop that, watch this 50.8 under total carried drop. Now, you see it drop to 45.9 after dropping her iron rations. Pick it back up, goes back up to 50.8. And another feature I added at the same time, which is for items inside a container. So you can see these 4 items are all indented under backpack, and all I did was drag them into the backpack. So if I, as an example, drag this wineskin into the backpack, there, now it's under backpack. And if I want to remove it, I just basically drag it over any non-container item. I can literally just drag it over the torch, and it'll pop back down on the bottom here, okay? So anyways, that's an old feature that's been there forever, but in case you don't know. Okay, so now if I do backpack and I say that, you'll notice it unequipped the backpack and all of the items inside the backpack. And all of that weight dropped off too. She dropped 8 pounds, over 8 pounds. If I pick it back up, she goes from 42 to 50.8. So 8.8 pound difference right there. So that was that feature. That was issue number 128 to add that feature. Then I had issue 129, which was to add the assassination table and rollable class ability for assassins. So let's see, do I have an assassin set up here? No. So let's just do one really quick. I'm going to actually show you guys something pretty cool, but then I'm going to demo it a little bit later. We're just going to do assassin, create. That's the feature. We're going to go into this in details in a little while here. And we'll go back over to chat now. All I have to do is tap this button to do an assassinate. Oh, I don't have a target, so I have to select a target. So let's just pretend I'm going to try and assassinate this guy right here. Close that out of the way too. We don't need him. So I've targeted Andronakos now, just because he's close by. Now I'm going to do that. We're going to attempt the skill. And we used assassinate backstab, and it says it failed because on a backstab attempt, rolling low is better. So if I try it again, let's see if I can roll low enough to make it succeed.
Of course I'm going to roll higher because that's what would happen. I'm going to have to roll really low. Goodness gracious me.
There we go. Finally rolled low enough. Now you'll notice I had put a target of 1 because the system's not really using that target number. You just have to have a number in there to make it happy. Now you can see it succeeded, and it actually tells you what needs to be done. It doesn't do any of these rolls for you automatically, but we know that Andronakos would have to make a death saving throw or just die immediately. However, if my original D20 attack roll was a natural 19 or 20, then no saving throw is allowed. So one thing I forgot to do was actually to make a backstab attack on him first, which I should have done. So I forgot my own rules, or the system rules, I should say. The system does not force that attack to happen, obviously. But the Hyperborea rules are that you make a backstab attack first, then you can try to roll your assassination attempt. And then if the target does make his death save, he still takes the full backstab damage, which, since I'm a level 1 assassin, the damage is +2. This is calculated dynamically based on your assassin level, so it does know when it goes up to ×3 and ×4. And it will give you the right information there. And then, of course, it just mentions other damage modifiers and such are added after the dice are totaled, which you would do when you're doing your damage dice roll. At the same time as I did this, I also added a ×4 multiplier on the damage dice rolls. Those of you who have used the system for a while, let's just do that. Let me just go ahead and make, I'm going to bring them up. Let's see, combat. Okay, our assassin is now going to try and attack Andronakos from behind, backstab, so we're going to do the short sword. We're going to give him a... Andronakos is currently hovering, so he's got higher ground, so that's why that -1 is there, but we're going to say +4 in addition. And we're going to hit attack, and hopefully we roll well enough to hit, and we did, so that's good. So we're going to roll damage. There we go. Now, this is where you would normally roll that assassinate thing. Okay, we got a successful assassinate attempt with a natural 20 on the d20. Okay, so we've got the ×2 multiplier, so I'm going to go back to my damage roll, which was this one right here, 4 hit points. So now I'm going to use this one to apply full damage plus a multiplier, and you now have the ×4 dice multiplier, which is used for high-level backstabs and failed assassinations that just become a pure backstab. In my case, it's just ×2 damage, so I would just roll that. And of course, the system knows to not add any additional modifiers, so it just took the original 4, which would have had modifiers on it. Where is that 4 points of damage? Here it is. Strength modifier, well, there wasn't one, but if there had been any other modifiers, that's what it would have been. It added the 2, we get 6, and I can apply the damage. So that was kind of a long-winded way of showing the assassination ability, but that is now there. So the next issue for release 1.9.0 was issue 130. For active effects, resolve a data path, which is basically a data field in the character, to its value in the effect value field. So this feature, let me just show you the haste spell because this is where it came up. So again, Andronakos, the wizard, he's got a haste spell here. Let's make sure he's got it memorized. But I'll show you the effect first. So if we go into here, of course the haste spell under details, that's normally what it would open to. You would see that hastened creatures can move at double their normal movement rates. And then also twice as many attacks per round. Now I can't do anything with the attacks per round as an active effect, but for the movement I can. So we're going to go to the effects. Again, I've created an effect with the same name as the spell. That's just a habit on my part, it's not a requirement. We go to changes. So the field that's going to be updated, of course, is this attribute key, and it's system.movement.tempMoveMod. Okay, and what that is it's this field right here, this temp move field right here. And this here is what's called a data path, this system.blah stuff. And then here is the one, the feature was actually on the value. If you've got a data path here, it can look up that field on the actor where the effect is being applied and get the value of it. So we look at and we go system.movement.base.value. That's this move field right here. So it's when this effect is applied to Andronakos, it's going to look that up, it's going to get 40, and it's going to apply the 40 to this temp move field right here. And then the character sheet will automatically take that 40 and add it to this 40 and turn that into an 80. Meanwhile, if we apply the same effect to, for example, Argyros, he has a move of 30. So his would look up 30, put 30 in temp move, and then this would become a 60. So I'll show you how all that works, and we'll start by, so we're going to go ahead and cast haste. There we go. And now we're going to apply haste. You can see it was applied to Andronakos. If I go to combat, you can see that temp move became 40 and move became 80. And under effects, we've got this haste right here, and there's the 40. So in the original spell, of course, it's going to have the data path, but it was resolved to this number when it was created on the character or the actor. If we go into haste down here and we look at this effect once again, there's that data path. So it did not update the effect here. You would not want it to do that. You want that to keep the formula, because every time you cast haste, it has to do that dynamically on any character that it's being applied to. Okay? Now if I do the same thing to Argyros, all I have to do is highlight him and apply haste, and now you can say I applied it to Argyros. And if I open him up, once again haste, and you're going to see that's a 30, as I promised. And yeah, plus 30 under temporary, and his move became a 60. So that was that feature. It dynamically reads one field in order to update a different field. That was issue number 130 in release 1.9.0. Okay, and the last issue for release 1.9.0 was issue number 131, enable inline roles in rich text editor fields. And so what we've got for that is, this came up, a user actually asked about this, and it essentially comes down to, let's say you've got this diseased bite capability on a zombie. If I edit this, you see these buttons here? This is the feature that was added. This didn't used to do this, so prior to release 1.9.0, it did not. It just showed you the formula, but it didn't give you a clickable button. Now you get a clickable button. All you have to do is, when you are doing this, you set it up as a roll macro right here inside a double square bracket, the /r space, and then the die roll formula. And again, the same one here for the D10 plus 2 hours. And with those two on there like that, go back and repop that. Now you've got a rollable number, which I can click. You can see it rolls, and there we go. It rolled D6 plus 6, and we got 12, as you can see. So that was the feature, issue number 131. It was the last feature that was added as part of release 1.9.0. Okay. Moving on to release 1.10.2. Jumped a couple of points there because I was doing some development and fixing some bugs internally before I actually did a release. But in issue 1.10.2, I actually had 5 things that were added. None of them were bug fixes. They were all actual legitimate features. So the first item that we had in release 1.10.2 was issue number 96, an older issue, and it was to add alternative damage types to weapons and spells. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's first of all look at spells, and then I'll come back to weapons. So if I fire up the acid arrow spell here, what I mean is, you see we've got a little book here now. It says damage types if I mouse over it. If I tap this, you can see that this acid arrow spell, which by description does 1d4 plus 1 physical damage plus an additional 2d4 acid damage. And there's those buttons that I was just talking about on that zombie as well. But so what I did was I set up these damage types. And so the base type is the base damage for an item or a spell. And by default, everything is just basic. So look, if you're a referee and you don't care to use this feature, just leave everything as basic and don't worry about it. It's no big deal. You're good to go. But if you want to use this stuff, you could say, well, let's see, this is a sort of quasi-physical magical arrow, so we're going to make it piercing damage of 1d4 plus 1. And then we're also going to do an additional acid damage of 2d4. Now, if I didn't want to do this at all, I could actually just blank this out, and I could say, save that. Now the alternate damage down here is gone, and I would just have to say plus 2d4. There you go, done. Now we're not using alternate damage types. It's just doing the whole damage roll in one thing, and you're done. But if you want to use them, we'll get rid of that. We'll tap back on here. We'll click on here. We're going to say acid. We're going to say 2d4, and we're going to save changes. And under alt damage, now you can see the acid 2d4 is back. And if I roll an attack, it actually puts that in the chat. So let's go ahead and make an acid arrow attack. And I don't have a target selected, so it's going to assume AC 10. That's fine. Hopefully I don't roll a 1 or something. Oh good, I hit. So I'm going to go ahead and roll the damage. First of all, you can see that the damage button took both bits of damage and rolled it and concatenated it all into a single formula, 1d4 plus 1 plus 2d4. And when we roll the damage here, you can see the piercing damage, because I had selected that for the physical damage, and acid damage for the acid part of the damage. Now, if you weren't using that feature, you would just see base damage, and it would be 1d4 plus 1 plus 2d4. So, again, you don't have to use this feature. It's totally optional. It's not something that's strictly in the Hyperborea rules as written, except that it's descriptive, like the acid arrow spell. So I thought, well, it would be fun to put it in the system and have it actually put it in here like this. So if you've got a creature that's resistant to acid damage, you can actually track that and say, oh yeah, well the 2d4 doesn't actually apply, or something like that. That would be a manual part. Right now it's informational, and it's just kind of fun. So there you go, you've got that. So that was the first thing for 1.10.2. Oh yeah, I also wanted to show just a regular weapon then. You could do the same thing like this flame brand here. If I edit him, so it's a broadsword, and you can see I've got alt damage of fire 1d4. And so I'm going to click the damage button here. So I already set up slashing for his 1d8, and then I said fire 1d4, because when he hits, he does the base 1d8 slashing damage plus an additional 1d4 fire damage when he strikes his target. For now, the point was to have this alternative damage as an add-on to the regular damage. Regular damage can also be this. Like if you have a fireball spell, you could just set it to fire and have, 3d6 or whatever the damage happens to be. Actually, it's at CA d6 because it is a dynamic formula. But you can do that for a fireball or cone of cold or whatever. So even on a spell, you can have its primary damage be one of these energy types. And for standard weapons, bludgeoning, piercing, slashing, I just went with the 3 common ones that honestly, it's from multiple other game systems use some version of this terminology, and I just went with that. Again, this is not strictly rules as written, it's purely optional. Leave it as basic because that's the default for everything. So if you leave it as basic, you don't have to use this and you're fine. Okay, so that's about all there is on that particular item. So the next one was issue 132. Need a more robust parser for effect change values. Okay, so that was actually talking about. Oops, I didn't meant to hit effects here. It was actually part to do with this persistent damage and part to do with the way some of the dynamic stuff was working on active effects. There's nothing really to demonstrate, but I sort of cleaned it up and made it a little better when you have dynamic fields like that haste spell I demoed a little bit ago. Things like that. I just improved the way it worked. Let's see, the next issue for release 1.10.2 was issue 133. When turning undead, the system should automatically include the charisma turn undead modifier in the die roll. Yes. So prior to release 1.10.2, if you had a cleric or a cleric subclass who had a turning ability, and if you set up the turn undead skill with a check roll and a target number, you would have to say minus at charisma.turn undead in order to apply this turn modifier, which it says +1, but of course it's going to be subtracted from the die roll to act as a bonus, right? Because you want to roll low. Okay, so you would have to say minus at cha.turn undead, just like it shows up right here, and then it would roll it correctly. If you didn't have that in there, you would just roll it. You would just get a raw d12, and I know that confused some people. So the user brought up the fact that, hey, this doesn't apply the turn undead modifier, and I said, yes, it does. You just got to put it in the check roll. But then I thought about it, and I was like, well, why don't we just make it easy? So I added code to handle it. So now when you roll the turn undead, it will automatically pull in your turn undead modifier. And you can see here, I rolled a 9. It subtracted 1 for charisma, and it became an 8. And so, yeah, it works. Now you can just, all you have to do is set up your turn undead. It has to have the name turn undead. And then you can give it, a D12. And actually, honestly, you can put a 1 there. It doesn't really matter what the target number is because the system looks at the turn undead table to determine the level of your success. I set it to 10 just because that's the worst possible number you could get to ensure any kind of success at all. But it doesn't have to be a 10. You can put whatever there. Okay, so that's that. It just handles your turn undead modifier automatically. Let's see. Next issue, 134. Create a way to masquerade items and NPCs as something ordinary or unidentified. Okay, so we have a couple of things here. We did NPCs and items. So let's talk about monsters and NPCs first because that's super easy. So I've got this combat set up here. I forgot to mention, I'm doing this demo in Foundry version 13. Now this is not my gaming system, i.e. that is to say I don't play any games in this. This is my test platform. But everything you're seeing here is in Foundry version 13, and if you've noticed any extra chats and stuff, that's because every once in a while I have to take a little break and fix something in my own data because it's a dev system and I've got wonky data. So when you see things like, oh look, he already did a turn undead test. In fact, he did 2 of them prior to actually doing the one that he last did. It's because I did 2 and had to fix my data before I actually talked about it. Anyways, that is neither here nor there. Let's go to combat. So I have this guy. So he's an orc necromancer, but I added this token alias and I call it Big Ugly Orc. And so as a GM, I see everything. But players only see Big Ugly Orc. And even when let's start up a combat, you can see Big Ugly Orc. So the players have no idea that this is an orc necromancer. All they know is he's a big ugly orc. I did the same thing with skeletons. I just called them skeleton archers because they're obviously skeletons and they happen to be archers. And I might have skeleton swordsmen too. I don't in this case, but I could. So different aliases, and they show up that way. And then I also handle the numbering schema. So for those of you who are maybe not aware of this feature, if you go into token, actually I can't do it here. I need to do it on the master actor, as it were. So if I look at skeleton and we go to prototype token, because this is where it counts, you see this append incrementing number checkbox. That's not checked by default. I have checked it. When I do that, what happens is I get skeleton archer with a little 1 in parentheses, skeleton archer with a little 2 in parentheses, and so on and so forth. If I drag a 3rd skeleton on there, he should be skeleton archer number 3 in parentheses, as it is. So that's what that feature does. In addition, if you look at zombie, I've got a different one set up on him. Prepend random adjective checked. Again, this is by default not selected. I have selected it. When I do that, then my zombies, which I also have said the token alias is Walking Dead. So the players are not going to see zombie. They're going to see Walking Dead. And they're going to see an adjective stuck on the front. It's prepended, so it's stuck to the front of that name. So you get ecstatic Walking Dead. Let me get rid of this skeleton. Ecstatic Walking Dead. And you get relieved Walking Dead. The system is this is core Foundry that does this. It's not, special to Hyperborea. But this can help you to track different tokens when you have a bunch of tokens of the same monster type on your map. Just use that feature. I'm going to get rid of that too. That's fine. So the big thing was token aliases. You can do that for monsters. Just fill in a new name and now your monster is hidden from your players. So in the combat, as I mentioned, you've got Big Ugly Orc, relieved Walking Dead. They don't know for all that the players know, this could be a wight, or it could be a ghoul. It happens to be a zombie, but they don't necessarily know that. So you just call it Walking Dead. Maybe just call it generic undead, whatever you want to call it. Bag of bones, whatever you want. And the features with numbering or with adding, prepending the adjective, both work with the token aliases. Now, if you want to change that on the fly in game, like on a map, you have to actually go into the token. So it's not as easy as just editing this. That won't do you any good. You'd have to go into the token and change the token name right here. And now I could type Orc Necromancer, which is the real actor's name, or I could just change it to Orc or whatever you want to do. But that's what would have to be done to rename the actual token. You can't do it from the alias. Same goes for the archer here. Skeleton Archer is the alias, but it's Skeleton Archer 1. We have to go into the token, Skeleton Archer 1, and this is where I could just change it to Skeleton Archer or Skeleton or whatever, skeletons, whatever you want to do. That would be that. Okay, let's talk about unidentified magic items, because that was the other piece, was unidentified items in general. So if I look at magic items here, and I'm just going to bring up this Ring of Invisibility as a good example. So on any item now, so physical items, these apply. So you won't see this on spells. You certainly won't see this on abilities. But on magic items, or I'm sorry, any items, physical items, items, armor, and weapons, there's now this identified checkbox. If I bring up an armor, you'll see the same thing, chainmail, identified. There's an alias name if not identified. So if you uncheck that box, incidentally, it will assign unidentified item if you didn't already have something in there. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. Oops, I need to recheck that. You see, if you try to assign it an unidentified name, the system rejects it. But now it's identified and it has chainmail and everything's fine. You also have a description if not identified down here. Let's get rid of chainmail. We're back to here, ring of invisibility. So you can see Alias's gold ring, and I'm actually just going to take and copy this first sentence right here. This ring is but a simple gold band. And I'm going to go down here and I'm going to paste it in there. And now, so first of all, let's go back here. So ring of invisibility right there. Now when I uncheck this, bam, now it says gold ring right here. As a GM, I can still see all this information. But players only get to see the gold ring and this description. And I'll show you what I mean by that, because now I've got this ring, and let's say that I want to make sure he doesn't already have it. He does. See, look at that. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that. So let's take and apply this gold ring, this unidentified gold ring, and we're going to add it to Argyros. So we're going to drag it on there. You can see it says gold ring. Now, as a GM, you might want to remove that gold piece value. I'm still in GM view here, so I see everything. And you might want to remove this gold piece value because, of course, that strongly implies that this thing is worth a lot of money. Well, that's the XP value, but same thing applies there. When you've got 15,000 gold here, that strongly implies something that you might not want the players to know. So you could leave XP and cost empty if you really want this to be unidentified. But I'm going to leave those there for now because I'm not worried about the demo. And of course, there's an effect of invisibility here too. So I'm going to show you what it looks like to a player. As the GM, we're seeing everything, as I said. And looking at this character sheet, of course, it shows us gold ring and it only shows this description, but again, I go in here and I see everything. As a player, so now I have Chrome open and I'm logged in just as an ordinary player that has access to Argyros. So I open up him. You see he's got the gold ring, again, the simple description. Again, the player can see the gold piece value, so that's a hint. So you would want to remove that if you really wanted to keep it hidden. But you can see here, it just says gold ring. And it's read-only. I can't actually edit that as a player now. Furthermore, the description I can edit, but it is just that simple description I provided under the alias. So go back here. It was this one down here that we're seeing, not the full description up here under description. So the player just sees that. Now, if the player can make a guess, the player can take notes here. Maybe ring of flying, the player maybe thinks. Need to test. Jump off a cliff, whatever. Right? So the player can edit that. They can add their own notes while it's not identified. If the player goes to effects, you see they see no effects. Now, the player probably guesses that this might be a magic item because it's so mysterious. All right, a little metagame maybe, but there it is. But still, the player doesn't know what it is. Now, the player takes it to a local wizard who identifies it for him. As a GM, you go in and click the identified checkbox. Now for the player, all of a sudden, ring of invisibility. And you can see actually their original unidentified thing here. The reason I display this is because if the player is adding notes, they might want to hold on to those notes and keep them handy for reference. But also the main description does come up here. You see all the extra fields here, including check rolls and other stuff that you might have wanted to keep hidden, but now they're available. And the effect is now there as well. So all the things become visible to the player once you've identified it. It's an all or nothing feature. Okay? As soon as you check that box or uncheck that box, the whole thing goes on and off. I can even unidentify it again, and now it goes back to being a plain gold ring. And again, that's all the player can see when they're editing it. They can see the location, but none of the other fields, etc. So that is how that works. Okay? Let's see. We'll go back here. And that was issue 134 for masquerading items and NPCs. The last issue that we did for this release was number 136, which is to add a gold piece value column to the character sheet items tab, which we are looking at right now. And you can see you've got the column right here, GP value, right between weight and location. And of course, that's just going to be whatever you have in the cost field for the item. And then it multiplies it by the quantity. So if you've got, like, you can see arrows are showing I've got 12 and a cost of 5. That's 5 per, so it's going to multiply 5 by 12 to get 60. Now that's actually wrong. Again, I mentioned earlier, I've got issues with my test system data. I generally don't clean it up all the time. So that's obviously an incorrect number, but the point is it multiplies it out. So it takes your weight, your gold piece value times your quantity to get the value that's shown here. In addition, the system sums up the gold piece value of all of your gear. So this is including your armor and weapons. Everything on the combat tab as well. It does not double dip your ammunition, by the way. It just looks at weapons and armor. So it's going to look at the gold piece values of those as well as all the stuff on your items tab to give you that total gold piece value right there. And that was issue 136, and that closes out this release. Release 1.10.7. We have 6 issues that were included in 1.10.7. Let's see, were any of them bug fixes? It looks like there was 2 bug fixes and 4 features being added. So, starting with issue number 135, add a new tag to NPCs called Phenotype. So that's very simple. You look at your monster NPC sheet, you now have this field for Phenotype. What I did was I looked through mostly through the referee's manual, through the bestiary section, but also through like the magic items and spells in the player's handbook to see if certain types of creatures are affected in special ways by different magic weapons, like, you know, a sword +4 versus lycanthropes or whatever, or versus daemons or something. So I tried to pull those specific creature types out and put them in this list. And then I added a couple of kind of generic things like animal and humanoid and plant and reptile. Actually, reptile I think is mentioned in the one of the magic items if I remember correctly. But anyways, I put this list together. Now this is, again, totally optional. Blank is a very valid option, just like that. You can just leave that blank. That's the default value anyway. So you don't have to use that at all if you don't want to. But if you want to, you've got it. In addition to that, you can also edit that list. So if we go into game settings, we'll configure the settings set for Hyperborea. It's near the bottom here, phenotypes. So there's the total list right there, just separated by commas. So you can add more names to this. You can remove names from this if you don't like them. Whatever you want to do. This is just your list to play with. It's again, you know, this isn't something that's strictly rules as written, but there's obviously implied usage of it when it comes to damage versus certain monster types or creature types. So I thought, as with the damage types of fire and cold and all that, this would be fun to implement and include in the system. So I did. And so, yeah, once you do that, that's turned on automatically. But again, if you just leave phenotype blank, you can ignore it. And it doesn't hurt anything. It doesn't do anything. It's strictly there for information. You know, maybe in the future, we could roll out a feature that would say does special damage versus this phenotype. But for now, we're not doing anything like that. So it's not, there's nothing depending upon that field being populated. Let's see, after that came issue 137, our first bug fix here. So this was for Foundry version 13. Tokens that got renamed with a number, these skeleton ones that I was talking about earlier, they were always getting 1. It wasn't actually incrementing to 2, 3, 4. That was a very simple fix. Nothing to demo there because I already showed you that it worked. So, that's that. It's super easy. Okay, so then we move on to issue number 138. Effects from items should be applied or removed when the item is equipped or unequipped. Now, I've already demonstrated that, even though at the time I originally released that feature, it wasn't there. But essentially what we're talking about is, we go back to the Ring of Invisibility. Remember when I equip, we'll do this here, so you can see it in the chat. When I equip it, you're going to get 2 chats. First, invisibility is enabled on Argyros. Second, Argyros is carrying or has equipped the ring of invisibility. And then unequipping it, invisibility disabled, Argyros dropped ring of invisibility. So that's what that does, is it was just the feature to toggle that turning on and turning off of the effect. That was issue number 138. Sort of a feature, one might call it a bug fix, but whatever you want to call it, that was issue 138. So the next we're going to go to a bug fix, issue 139. This was actually a Foundry version 13 bug, and it was an issue with item effect changes. So we're not going to worry about demonstrating that because as far as I know, no one has actually updated to version 13 of Foundry yet anyway, so it was just a bug that I noticed. Then we get to issue number 140. The item name and alias do not always rename correctly. So I actually had to deal with a couple of bugs for that. Now they work correctly. As you've been seeing, I've been popping back and forth with the gold ring and, you know, on the item, both on the character sheet and over here. If I do it here and it's gold ring, but as soon as I identify it, it changes to ring of invisibility as you would expect. So it all works nicely. One of the other bugs was someone actually, they would add an item to their character sheet. Now I've got new item here, and the new item was not getting named correctly here. And then if I wanted to rename it, it wouldn't rename correctly, but now it does. As soon as I hit test 1, you can see it popped over here. It says test 1. I can change it to test 2, and I can hit close, and it updates to test 2 there. And of course, there's no description. I didn't put a description, but I can put a description in there. You know, whatever it happens to be. Let's see if I close out of there. Actually, I didn't save that, so it might not be in there. Oh, it did. It did save for me, so that's good. It auto-saved. Wasn't sure if that would work, but yeah. So that was an issue, but all those things have been fixed now. Everything that I'm aware of with regards to renaming items, there were bugs introduced because of that item alias feature, have been fixed at this point. Okay, so then we've got the last issue for release 1.10.7 was items with effects apply their effect immediately on the actor, even if not equipped. So the issue here really comes down to setting up the item correctly. And so as a general best practice, if you go into your items, we're going to create a new magic item, for example, or even I could just look at probably Gauntlets of Ogre Power are already set up correctly, but if not, well, I'll show you the mistake. So we have Gauntlets of Ogre Power, we have Superhuman Strength. This should only be applied when the item is being worn. And if it's not being worn, it should not be applied. So the trick is, first of all, we have it set to carried. So if it's dragged onto a character, it's assumed to be equipped automatically. So then you would want the effect to be enabled right away. But many times you don't want to do that with a magic item, especially if it's unidentified or something like that. So you would actually want to uncheck the carried tag so that when they drag it to their sheet, it's not equipped. It's just in their inventory, but not actually being worn. And then the other thing is you would have to go into your actual effect here, and you would want to say the effect is suspended. So we do that. We save those changes. So now it's under inactive effects, as you can see here. And of course, this is carried. So then when I drag this item, let's just put it on Andronakos, right? And so once I put this on him, and you can see it's not equipped, and there's the Superhuman Strength, which is listed as inactive, so it's not being, you know, enabled on him right away. And of course, from here, I can't actually do that because it's part of the item, so I have to equip the item, and then it will automatically become activated. So once he puts the item on, like that, now the effect becomes right there. It's passive, it's on all the time, and I forget what the actual bonus is. Oh, it bumps up his modifiers. So you see he's got a strength of 7, but he's got modifiers equivalent to like an 18 strength. So it didn't actually bump the strength up, that's by design, but it did bump all of his mods up to equivalent of 18 strength. And then if I unequip the item, you know, that part works, of course. But the idea was when the item is first dragged onto a sheet, even if it was not equipped right away, the effect was being enabled right away, so I had to fix that. That's it. Pretty straightforward bug fix. And that was issue number 141, and that is the completion of this release. And that brings us to release 1.11.4. So this is our latest release, and we have two things here. I'm actually going to do this in reverse order. Issue number 147 was a bug fix. This was another part of the item naming and description issues because of the item alias. So really, I already talked about that. And I've shown it off. Should be working for everybody at this point. Okay, so the big thing with this release 1.11.4 is the PC quick creation feature. Now, I already showed you that very briefly when I very quickly created an assassin. So there's a lot to this. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create an actor. Let's do a barbarian. Now this would be the character's name, but I'm just going to call him barbarian because we're going to select barbarian for the class. So what you do is you start here, you select the class you want to play, and actually let me back up a step. First of all, this is an optional feature and it's disabled by default. So referees, game masters, you need to go into your configuration settings here. You need to enable quick create characters. I need to back up a step. This is enabled by default, but you can disable it. The default value is method 1 3d6. But you can disable it just by selecting that. So GMs, referees, if you would prefer for your players to roll a specific method and hand roll and apply those dice to their character sheet, just disable it here and you're good to go. But if you are, and this is one of those things where, well, let me just talk about what the system does, and then you can kind of see the difference. First of all, I'm only supporting 3 different methods, not all 6 methods, because the other methods that aren't listed here are ones where the player is allowed to assign, they roll their 6 numbers, but then they assign them as they see fit. This system rolls down the line. For all 3 of these versions, it only rolls down the line. So what it does, I'm going to go, this is the default, is 3d6, but you can do 4d6 drop lowest, you can do 2d6 plus 6. Any one of those cases, it rolls 3d6 down the line for all 6 attributes. So we'll leave it there. That's the default setting. So here's what happens. I've selected Barbarian. You'll notice I haven't rolled stats yet. Again, referees, if you would prefer your characters, or your players rather, to roll their dice and apply their numbers and then figure out what class they apply for, then you're going to want to disable this feature. Because this allows someone to just let the system roll for them until they get numbers that meet the minimum requirements. And it's very quick to do that, but it'll roll 10 times if it needs to, because it does a total top-down 6 attributes in order. Then it checks to see if they meet the minimum requirements for a barbarian. And if any one of them fails, it rolls all 6 all over again. And you can see for a barbarian, these 3 are glowing red, strength, dex, and con, because they all have minimum requirements that are higher than 10. So you know that it has to roll top to bottom. The first 3 all have to be better than whatever their requirements are. I think it might be something like 13, but whatever it happens to be, the system is going to roll over and over until it gets a set of attributes that meet those minimum requirements. Then it will apply them. Then it will do effectively this same set attribute modifiers button that's been here for months, for a long time. It'll run that same feature, so it applies all your modifiers, and it fills in your saving throws, it fills in your fighting ability, it fills in casting ability if you have one, it fills in turning ability if you have one. It does all that. It fills in your hit dice, hit die. That's all part of the set attribute modifiers. So the create button rolls the attributes until it gets to set. Then it does all the set attribute modifier stuff, right? It does all the same functions. Then it rolls your hit points for you based on the hit die and your constitution modifier. Then the system will actually create the starting pack of weapons, armor, and equipment for that character class. So that's right out of the player's handbook. It uses the starting pack and it just creates those items. Now, if as a referee, if you pre-configure any items here, like your armor or your weapons, which I don't have much here, but I have all of the armor here. If you pre-create those and they're pre-configured, so like Banded Mail has the correct armor class and the weight class and the base move and all that jazz, and it has the right name, has to be the same name as what's in the player's handbook. As long as you do that, the system will pull in that item. Has to be in an armor folder, by the way, in the folders for armor. Weapons has to be in a weapons folder. Equipment has to be in an equipment folder. You can have multiple equipment folders. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But for armor, it has to be an armor folder. Weapons, you can have subfolders if you want. Melee and missile only. So you could have a melee folder and a missile folder, subfolder. It'll still find, or you could just have everything in one flat folder. Either way is fine. It'll find your weapons. Again, as long as it's named the same as it is in the player's handbook. So like a short sword is sword, comma, short, as an example. Short bow is bow, comma, short. It's not case sensitive, so it could be upper or lower case, whatever. But it does have to be spelled correctly. All right? Banded mail for the armor. So the system will pull those items in if it can find them. And same goes for generic equipment. This is the items, the items directory, right? There's your actors directory. There's your items directory. If you have, now this is my compendia. Again, this is not for public consumption at this time. This is my development compendium. If you have this someday in the future, once it's been released, the system will always also look here. So if you don't have those items in your items directory, it will look for compendia matching these exact names. So I can tell you this, you could also create a personal compendium called armor and put all your armor in there, and that will work just as well as it will if it's right here in this armor folder. Same for weapons, same for equipment. If you use these names, equipment space hyphen space general, equipment space hyphen space provisions, equipment space hyphen space religious, it has to follow those names, okay? Because that's what I did for the commercial product that will be released. And so if you're going to use compendia, a personal compendium, you need to use the same naming schema because that is what the system is looking for. Honestly, I wouldn't recommend it, but I know some people use personal compendia, so if you're going to do that, just be aware you have to have those names. And then the items in those names, again, have to match the way they look in the player's handbook. Like bolt, comma, light, comma, silver tipped times 1, right? To get a light crossbow bolt that's silver tipped. Things like that. Okay. All that to say, when I hit quick create, look at all that. So we'll start from the abilities tab. It rolled the stats. You can see those meet the requirements. I actually rolled really well because it was doing 3d6 down the line and my worst roll was a 10 on wisdom. I mean, I've actually rolled a natural 3 in the past. As long as it's not in one of the prime requisites, it's allowed. Prime attributes, I should say. It would be perfectly allowed and it would come through. So it applied all my modifiers. Under combat, you can see it pulled in my items, my weapons, pulled in my ammunition, pulled in my armor and shield. Again, it's pulling these either from things like my armor folder in the items directory. It found short bow right here, but it did not find bastard sword, so it had to pull that from the compendium, which it did. It did not find dagger in here either, so it had to pull that from the compendium, which it did. And you can see it's got all the stats and everything, the damage and all that. If it can't find the items, it's going to create a blank item with the name and the quantity, which, with weapons is generally going to be 1, right? But that's all it's going to give you is the name and the quantity. And then you can fill in the stats. But at least it populates your character sheet for you, which is kind of nice. So it'll create all these items. And then, again, your general equipment, it's going to pull in either from, I can have equipment folders in this items directory. Oops, I keep tapping that. I can have equipment folders in here. As long as it has the word equipment in the name of the folder, it'll look there and check to see if any items match these names, and it'll pull them in. Since I don't have anything with equipment, it again went to the compendium, and it looks for these specific names, and the item has to match. So provisions, that's where your rations are going to be. Iron rations and standard rations, for example. Those are the two that are most commonly used out of the rations. These are right off the tables in the player's handbook, by the way. Again, religious equipment is all your religious stuff, holy symbols, holy oil, water, etc., etc. Okay? So you have to match up the table from the player's handbook and this name So the items have to be there. I can't just put my religious items in equipment general. It won't find it. It is going to be looking for religious items in a religious equipment or equipment religious compendium. So sorry for the complexity. It's just the way it has to work in order to find these and work with the compendium that's coming. So again, it pulls in all these items. These were all pre-configured, so it pulls in all the information, and there it is. Pretty nifty. And that is that feature. So it creates all that. It does not do character abilities. You're on your own to create your class abilities. And likewise for spells, of course, because you would be selecting spells anyway, so you would never want to do the spells. So that's about that. I know this has been a long video, but that's everything that gets us up to date through release 1.11.4. That character quick create feature, hopefully everybody will get great use out of that. It's good for players, but honestly, it's also good for GMs who are getting ready to maybe run an introductory one-shot and they just want to do some pre-gen characters for their players to choose from, for players who have never played Hyperborea. Just, roll up 15, 20, all 26 character classes, whatever you want. It's only going to take you a couple of minutes anyway. And you've got all these character classes created, or all your characters, I should say, created based on the class you selected. And all you'd have to do then is create the class abilities on there, and you'd basically be good to go. So hope you all enjoy that feature. Good adventuring in Hyperborea, everyone. And this is Dave signing off. Have a good day.